I'm Corey Pine. I used to work at Willamette Week for many years. About 5 years ago, I left to join the startup world. Jury's out if that was a mistake or not. About a year ago, I decided it was time for a change again. I saw everybody getting rich in tech except for me. So I decided to move to the Bay Area, try one more time to make it big. I'm writing a book about that experience. I'll try to talk about it later. But right now, I'm supposed to talk about the dark side of the sharing economy. One thing I've learned trying to raise money for startups in Silicon Valley is it's better to focus on the positive. So as you can see, I'm focusing on the positive. I'm going to talk about the benefits of the sharing economy that you might not have heard of. Now, without innovation, words get old and boring. Sharing economy does is give us new meanings for old words. You know, the phrase sharing economy itself was invented about 5 years ago by some very clever consultants to describe companies like Airbnb, Etsy, Uber. There were articles, very enthusiastic articles, in like The Atlantic, for instance. One was called Occupy Big Business. And it defined the sharing economy as based on people coming together to create their own markets, their own products, and their own currency. It relies on shared needs, trust, and the belief that the group is stronger than the individual. Sounds almost communist. Well, it didn't quite turn out that way. There were some competing alternative phrases like collaborative consumption and the access economy, but sharing economy stuck. Why? Well, it sounds more cuddly, doesn't it? And one consultant said it especially appealed to millennials. What does it actually mean, though? I mean, as you can see, words do change meaning over time. Sharing once meant portioning, dividing. It always meant something else different in tech, like time sharing on mainframes or code sharing in an open source movement. Later, file sharing, which kind of meant stealing, but sharing sounds better than that too. Today, in the sharing economy context, it means to monopolize. It means to crush your competitors through illegal business practices. That is the sharing economy. In another sense, it's still just a meaningless buzzword, though, because you don't even have to be a tech company anymore to be engaged in the sharing economy. You can look at a directory. There's one popular directory of sharing economy companies with 9,000 businesses on it. Many are just traditional SEO, advertising, marketing, sharing their bullshit with you. You don't even need to be tech company. Walmart has a sharing economy project where they get customers to deliver packages, which, good for them, I guess. Another obvious benefit of the sharing economy, full employment for thankfluencers like me. There's an endless series of TED Talks about how to cash in on this, such as sharing economy, Plan B for moving America forward. Jury's still out on that, too. And it's a payday for consultants like Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, McKinsey, who are giving dubious advice to bigger corporates who want to keep up with the tech scene. And it's provided a lucrative second career for political operatives like David Plouffe, who until recently was Uber's chief lobbyist, getting them into all kinds of cities like Portland, where it wasn't necessarily welcome, or Portland's own consultant Mark Wiener, who was representing Uber as a lobbyist, as Willamette Week just reported, while giving advice to some of the top people in City Hall. So in summary, the sharing economy is a bottomless tub of gravy for well-connected insiders. The sharing economy extends the life of the venture capital tech bubble. Now, investors are always looking for the next big thing. As you can see, the sharing economy filled a valuable void between Web 2.0 and the Internet of Things. So keeping it going. These speculative bubbles are the Silicon Valley modus operandi. They're a huge windfall for investors who are well-connected enough to get in early. And honestly, they're really the only thing going in the American economy anymore. So thank the sharing economy for that. Convenience. We all have convenience. And there's many new labor-saving operations like TaskRabbit, which you may have heard of. It's a way to hire people for odd jobs on demand. The #1 Bay Area gig on TaskRabbit is waiting in line for people at restaurants, which maybe not the most productive use of the unemployed American workforce, but there it is. This is a fine American tradition, though. I mean, we are the country that invented Lunchables, pre-mixed peanut butter and jelly, the self-twirling spaghetti fork, and tech has really brought new innovation there. Class mobility. Now, there is real class mobility encouraged by the sharing economy. Granted, most of it's downward. However, there is also upward wealth distribution to the companies whose business model consists of taking 20 to 30% of every transaction that they have inserted themselves into, creating a new class of middlemen. But for those who can afford to pay for such services like Alfred Club here, where you can get a butler on demand, you may not be able to afford Bruce Wayne's mansion, but you can get a feeling of being like Batman for an hour at a time. Other sharing economy startups are doing time sharing on like yachts and private jets, so that's very exclusive sounding, but it is all about the people, remember? So another trend, another benefit of the sharing economy. It has fostered another new class called, by some economists, the precariat, because their financial situation is so precarious. Others use the term, there's a real term, others use the term involuntary entrepreneurs. And these are people who start businesses or become small-time entrepreneurs with these services because they have no other way to make a living. Look on the bright side, they don't have to call themselves unemployed, they're startup founders. But since the 2008 crash, you've probably heard the phrase jobless recovery. That means the GDP is back up, but jobs are not, which means that all the growth has gone to profits, not wages. That describes most sharing economy gigs perfectly, as does the labor practices of, longer hours, no benefits, and subjecting workers to very intense data-driven surveillance, which leads to a bigger point. The main thing that keeps these sharing economy companies going is a lack of jobs elsewhere. Now, does that make them not unicorns, say, but vultures? I think that's unfair because vultures serve a useful purpose in the ecosystem. They get rid of decaying flesh. They're really more like tapeworms, like parasites. And you've got to marvel at their success, really, because what do they add? This value is very dubious. Another benefit. Now, you may have heard how hard it is to get a job if you're, say, a convicted felon or a violent sociopath. That's another problem that the sharing economy solves. This guy, this is a very sad case, very notorious case. He raped a number of women in Delhi before he was arrested, and of course there was no background check. In the US, it's not just been customers, but drivers who've been stalked through Uber. You might have heard of a case last week in Spain involving Airbnb guest who was sexually assaulted by the host. There were numerous warnings, urgent warnings that the company ignored. This all sounds bad, but consider the alternative. These companies might have to pay for background checks like many other businesses do, and there's not really anything innovative about that. The sharing economy has done another great thing for us. It's increased political engagement. You might have heard the French taxi drivers shut down the city earlier this year in protest of Uber, which, by the way, the government there had ruled illegal. That's not the only country where that's happened. Elsewhere, courts and regulators are pushing back, not to mention competing business owners. California judge just ruled that Uber has to treat its contractors as employees, which they are. That could change, but they're keeping the government busy, so that's good. Now, I was just in the Bay Area. I lost count of how many times I heard, I want to move to Portland. And there's a myth, I heard more than once, that you can still get an apartment here for $300 a month. Now, I had told people that was false. I did a little Twitter search, moving to Portland, so stoked to leave this piece of shit city finally. Moving to Portland, making moonshine for a living. It's not just San Francisco, but elsewhere. Airbnb units are consuming the housing stock. There's professional management companies running multiple listings, taking properties off the market, accelerating gentrification, raising prices for everybody, hence more Californians in Portland. They do bring money, that's good, and culture, new words like Hellenorl. The sharing economy encourages minimalism. This is my last Airbnb. This was in Mountain View, in somebody's backyard. It was pretty much all I could afford at this point in traveling all year. It was $30 a night. There was another tent in Mountain View for $45. I think I got the better deal. I'm certainly lowering my carbon footprint. Now, one great benefit of the sharing economy, it lowers operating costs. Now, the main way it does that is by externalizing the cost of doing business, usually to the workforce. So not only does it crush labor, it crushes small business as well. The best comparison is maybe the old-time company stores where you finish a day's work in the mines and they come and give you monopoly money, basically, with only one place you can spend it. This basically depresses wages throughout the economy, not to mention reducing the quality of service. I stayed in a lot of crappy rooms. The tent was the best. And it also adds up to a faster route to monopoly for a lot of these companies, which, according to famous tech investor Peter Thiel, is a good thing. Avoid fussy regulations. Now, taxi licenses, hotel licenses, payroll taxes in the case of many of these companies, all that's avoided. And it goes beyond regulatory arbitrage, which is where a company says it's more favorable for me to do business in this jurisdiction versus this other jurisdiction. It's really, the model is we're going to flout the law, make a fortune, and then pay off lawyers, politicians, and fixers to take care of the mess later. Finally, you can say the sharing economy does bring people together. Here's an example, some very savvy, enterprising, self-employed service providers did use Airbnb to grow their business by turning people's apartments into pop-up brothels. That's innovation. It is also bringing people together in a much broader sense. More and more of us know what it's like to have a crappy sharing economy gig, to work 3 jobs, but make less than minimum wage in each of them, to desperately hawk whatever you own or whatever spare time you have at gutter prices, to have strange men living in tents in your backyard. Soon, we may also share the long-forgotten experience of paying tribute to lords who have unlimited economic power. So serfdom. The alternative, I guess, is a targeted campaign to put these companies out of business through boycott, strikes, legislation. Unfortunately, there's no app for that yet. This is my contribution to the sharing economy. Laborize. You can see the concept strikes as a service. The idea is you hire us, we organize a union at your competitors. So you get a temporary competitive advantage because their costs have gone up relatively. It scales, that's the good news. VCs haven't believed me, but it scales. Ultimately we'll unionize the planet by turning the corporate tendency for short-term gain against itself. That's my talk. You can get in touch with me on Twitter or wherever. So I think I'm talking to Mark or somebody.
How about a hand for Corey? Over here, Corey. Okay. So we've got time for a few questions, but Corey, how do you really feel about the sharing economy?
Well, there are negatives.
So here's what I don't get, and I don't think about this anywhere near as profoundly as you do. Obviously, there are some sharing economy companies that have questionable business practices. And the word sharing economy, you're right, we need to come up with a new name. But it's hard to dispute the convenience if you're a consumer of a ride-sharing service. And frankly, I've now taken Uber or Lyft probably 100 times across this country. Every single one of these drivers is thrilled at the flexibility. They say the amount of money they're making is satisfying to them. It's, in many cases, the classic immigrant story. I mean, it strikes me. And since they rate me and I rate them, I never behave better than I do when I'm in an Uber or a Lyft car. What's wrong with that?
So, well, one thing, there's a bit of illusion with the fact that they feel like they're making more money and you feel like you're paying less money because that VC bubble is subsidizing those prices. That's a short-term strategy to drive their competition out of business. The other thing is, there is no disputing the convenience. I mean, the problem is because they have so much money and it's so expensive to recruit tech talent. A traditional taxi company that maybe wants to get in on this or some other startup is going to have a real hard time getting people to make a competent app. I mean, I think in San Francisco there's one called Flywheel that's like you can hail a yellow cab through the app, but it's just not very good. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. Oh, I forgot this is irrelevant. Ignore this. Yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
And what do you say to individuals who claim, I can now stay in my home because I can rent out a room to Airbnb? I
talk to a lot of people like that. It's horrible. I mean, they should be down at City Hall complaining about whether it's not rent control. I mean, that's a political problem that these companies are essentially coming in and providing a very mercenary solution to.
So if you're a cab, there's nothing proprietary about what Uber has. It's an app.
Right.
In theory, cab company could do the same.
Exactly.
So if cab companies were doing it and it weren't these new companies, you'd feel better about that?
Well, I mean, I'm not, well, I do kind of want to, I just got rid of my smartphone, but I mean, I think it would be fine. I mean, the problem is they're so far ahead. They've already got the market share and the first mover advantage. And, they've got lobbyists. And how much, I don't know what Uber's tech budget is, but it's got to be astronomical. To even hire a developer who could compete with that in the Bay Area. I mean, most taxi companies are going to be like, are you kidding me? They can't afford that.
All right. Anybody want to pose a question to Corey? And if so, stand up and someone with a mic will walk down to you. There's a gentleman here. You got to wait till the mic gets to you so we can capture this on video. Have our volunteers with microphones left the building to go eat lunch? That's great.
Yeah, they missed out.
All right. Yell it as loud as you can, please.
Why is this a sharing economy issue and not just a regulatory policy issue?
I think that's a great point. I think that absolutely these companies are flouting existing law, much less new regulations that might account for previously impossible things. I think to answer that, you have to look at sort of the stereotype of the bureaucracies that they move slowly. That's certainly true of government, but also the fact that a lot of these tech companies have poured millions and millions of dollars into the Democratic Party at national level, state level, local level, because those are the politicians who control the cities where their largest markets are.
Time for.
What's the alternative? A return to traditional industry where everybody's working 40-hour working jobs and there's limited flexibility? What's the alternative?
Flexibility. Well, you see a lot of people on different sides of the political spectrum talking about a basic income guarantee. And that's something I think you're going to hear more about. Because these corporate titans that eventually are going to have a stranglehold on our economy realize that there's going to be social unrest if there's millions of people out of work. I mean, that's the subtext of what you heard earlier this morning about what are all these drivers going to do, when driverless cars put them out of work.
We've got time for one more question right here. If you could hang on, Mike will get your way so we can capture this. Thank you.
So that touched upon actually what my question was, which is it seems like this is a short-term problem with the Uber drivers getting squeezed and the cab companies getting squeezed because Uber has hired away most of Carnegie Mellon's robotics engineering teams to deploy robotic cars in the future. So we're gonna see that all of these Uber drivers who are in the sharing economy basically are without that economic opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's ludicrous to believe that all those taxi drivers are going to become software engineers and robotics designers. I mean, get real.
Okay, get real. Thank you, Corey.
Thanks, Mark.